Professor Karp, introduce me to the boy you were. Where are you living? What is your family's life, intellectual particularly?
I grew up in a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts. That's actually a section of the city called Dorchester, the breeding ground of many famous Jewish scientists and businessmen, perhaps analogous to the role that Brooklyn played in the development of New York City.
Okay.
My father was a school teacher. He graduated from Harvard in 1927. My parents both had a depression mentality, so playing it safe was extremely important. And so he gave up his dream of going to medical school and took a safe position as a teacher, but not a lucrative one, so that he spent many evenings and late afternoons traveling around the city to scrape up a few dollars giving tutorials. And
so security was very important.
Security was very important. My mother was a very intelligent woman, but she, as with many people of that generation, she did not go to college. She finished high school and had various secretarial positions before raising the family of four.
Of four?
Yeah. I'm the oldest, and I have two younger brothers and a younger sister. They were born at 4-year intervals. My parents provided for the phasing of college education expenses. And I was a quiet child, allegedly precocious. I was reading very early, did well in school in the early years, skipped a grade. And
not pushed to do that. I'm very interested in how ambitious they are for you.
I later found out that the impetus for skipping the grade was from the school, from the teacher, who felt that I would be bored.
Okay.
But they were ambitious, and it was education above all. So I was exempted from many of the duties that a good family participant might be expected to have, as long as I held up my performance at school.
That was the most important.
That was the most important thing.
And how early were your interests shaping in one direction versus another?
Not so terribly early. I think I discovered my bent for mathematics only in high school when I took plane geometry. But I was very proud of my mental arithmetic skills, which I entertained people with by multiplying 3-digit numbers or occasionally 4-digit numbers.
And you had schoolmates who were entertained by that?
No, this was actually, I didn't really have close relationships with schoolmates, in part because I was a year and a half younger than my classmates. In fact, one of the tragedies of my youth was when I applied to be a member of the neighborhood social group that had a football team and various secret activities, and I was denied allegedly on the grounds of age.
Ah, yeah. Okay. So you're, is it melodramatic to say a lonely kid?
I was a lonely kid. No, I wasn't lonely, but I didn't have close friendships.
That's an important distinction.
I went to Boston Latin School from the 7th grade on, and that served the whole city. So the kids came, and by the way, it was all male, and the kids came from all over the city and dispersed, and I had some friendships, but on the whole, I didn't have a very active social life.
What about at Boston Latin, a particular teacher as mentor, somebody taking an interest in you?
Yes, I had a math teacher who did take a particular interest in me, and for some reason I was first in the class, but I was more or less co-equal with some of the other bright kids, except in math, where for some reason nobody else stood out as talented in mathematics.
And were they beginning to guide you into a professional interest in it as young as then?
Not the teacher. The teacher gave me a lot of support, although he was an austere fellow. And I don't think he ever had his arm around me or treated me parentally, but he recognized that I was strong in mathematics. My parents recognized it. One of the misfortunes was that I somehow couldn't take instruction from my father.
You're not the first boy in history.
So he tried to introduce me to chemistry, and memorizing the names of the elements was not interesting for me.
Right.
And he tried to teach me some math. He was a math teacher. He was a
math teacher?
He was a math teacher, a junior high school math teacher. His knowledge of mathematics didn't extend very far. He had difficulty understanding some simple notions, which so I quickly surpassed him in mathematics.
And let him know that?
and let him know that, yeah.
Yes.
He was mystified by the fact that the equation x equals 1 has only one solution, but if you square it, you get 2 solutions. He found that quite mysterious, things like that. So he didn't really try to teach me mathematics once I was once I had given evidence of being inclined that way.
Right.
I remember in 10th grade when we did Euclidean geometry, which was really eye-opening for me in its elegance, that I would pretend to be sick so that I could stay home and solve geometry problems.
Right. Others may have chosen other reasons to pretend, but
yeah.
For you it was to solve problems.
Yeah, but I was a very, I would say, submissive child. I never did anything radical. I didn't skip school.
Oh, yeah.
And I was very respectful of my mother, although in my teenage years I began to resent her dominance.
Again, not unknown in history.
Right.
So Boston Latin, of course, was one of the famous feeders for Harvard.
Right.
Is that? Well, it seemed an inevitable next step.
Yeah. In fact, they had a very special relationship with Harvard, and at the time they would take as many as 80 students. I think now it's a small, even though the school has maintained its level over the years and adapted nicely to changes in the population of Boston. Now they take about 20 kids, I think. But at the time they took 80. And I got a so-called national scholarship, which enabled me to live in the dorms, which was...
instead of commuting from Dorchester.
Instead of commuting from Dorchester.
Or commuting from Dorchester, too. So there you are at Harvard.
Yeah.
How are you sorting out your major, your teachers, your sense of self?
Well, I had an exaggerated sense of self at the point of high school graduation, because I mopped up a lion's share of the awards at graduation and so forth, and And at the time, I had I was suspending self-criticism somehow. I thought that I only had to choose between being a Nobel Prize winning physicist or becoming governor of Massachusetts.
Well,
of course,
a tough decision, but that was understood. So you were confident.
I'm not sure that I was confident down deep.
Ah.
I think I had a fantasy life in which finishing first in the class was just the launching pad for greatness, but I wouldn't say that I was confident down deep.
So how are you setting up this future greatness at Harvard?
Well, with a thud, basically. So, first of all, I was pretty immature. I was starting at age 16.
You were younger, yes, of course.
And I had a wonderful group of 3 roommates who have remained lifelong friends, and that was a very fortunate development. So that was great. And I came out a bit socially at Harvard. I had some friends, a circle of friends. But I quickly discovered that I was not the most talented kid in the class. I mean,
that's often a Harvard experience.
Yeah. First of all, the preppies seemed, from Andover and Exeter, seemed to be, first of all, they had much more savoir-faire, which I was totally lacking at the time, and also seemed to be better prepared.
Even in mathematics and the sciences?
Yeah, for example, the physics that I had at high school was laughable.
Really?
I remember Danny Shea was the instructor. He stood in the corner of the room, and the only thing he ever taught us was something about the angle at which a pile of coal forms. The physics class was totally useless.
So you had catching up to do.
Yeah, and I didn't take chemistry in high school because I liked Latin a lot.
Right.
And I opted to take a 6th year of Latin in lieu of chemistry. So I hadn't had either chemistry or physics.
Are you being guided at Harvard? Is somebody saying, well, if you're going in this direction, you'd better do this?
No, I had nominally I had an advisor. I met with him a couple of times. We chatted about math, and it was pretty clear that I wanted to be a math major,
okay.
or do something related to math.
Okay.
I think in that era, the gods of science were the theoretical physicists, of course, after Manhattan Project, and so my mother, who was more of a driving force, my father was relatively passive. My mother sort of planted the seed that maybe I would be a physicist.
Because she was ambitious for you.
She was definitely ambitious, although tolerant, because when I didn't have perfect grades, they were never critical. Like my first year was mixed. I had a mix of A's and B's, but I wasn't anywhere near the top.
Right.
And I was fine in math, and I breezed through the math, although it was just basic calculus. So in those days, you didn't have calculus in high school, and I hadn't done anything exceptional to build my math background, so I was just taking the regular freshman math, which was very easy for me.
Right.
But I found physics challenging. And
for one thing, you were badly prepared.
I had essentially no preparation.
Right.
And the preppies all had a solid physics course.
Right.
And I also felt that the explanations were somehow unsatisfying.
I want to stay there, because being unsatisfied with explanations marks your career. So you're sorting out your potential to be the physicist your mother wants you to be.
Well, I wasn't anywhere close to being committed to that direction.
Right. But mathematics was solid for you.
Right.
Did you have a mentor yet? I mean, when does it turn out that there is a significant figure that shapes?
A little bit in my senior year, which I can go to talk about that if you want.
Yes, please.
So my senior year was mixed because I was just sort of encountering graduate level mathematics, and it was a different. Well, first of all, I had a catastrophe in the second half of my junior year. I got ditched by a girlfriend and went into a funk.
That is a catastrophe.
During which I spent all my afternoons playing chess at the Boylston Chess Club in downtown Boston, and so my grades tailed off. And I remember a dramatic moment with my parents when my grade report arrived. They had never, been critical about my performance, but it went off a cliff in the second half of my junior year, and I tearfully broke down and told them that Lisa had ditched me. So it took me a while to
climb back up. But you did.
I did in my senior year. But the experience was mixed because I took an introductory probability course, and I had some kind of a bent for probability and combinatorics, and so I was sailing through that course and relishing every minute of it. And I did have the professor Hartley Rogers, who had an important career in mathematical logic later. Was then a teaching fellow, and he encouraged me. He let me know that I had something going for me.
And what form did that encouragement take? Because by your senior year, you're thinking, what next?
Well, I'm thinking what next, and actually, but I want to digress to also talk about the other side of the coin.
Okay, please.
Which is that I was taking a graduate course on complex analysis. And there were 3 students in the class who were miles ahead of me. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that one of them was going to get a Nobel Prize and the other one was going to get a Fields Medal.
Oh my God.
And the third one also had a serious career in mathematics. And he was actually the most precocious. He was a freshman.
My God.
And I knew that I wasn't in their league, and so so the year was mixed because I was great in this probability course and also a baby statistics course that was a piece of cake for me. But then in the graduate mathematics,
you were being educated in your limitations.
I was perceiving limitations.
Right.
And I drifted into the computation lab and took I guess I took 2 semesters of numerical analysis, which was, again, I was a lazy student and I wasn't really at the very top there, but I could have been if I had worked. I mean,
Tell me the state of thought about computation at this point. I mean, you're at the cusp of a revolution. We are all at the cusp of a revolution then. What are you thinking about that as you drifted into the computational lab?
Well, Harvard was one of the few places that really had a computer in those days. The term computer science had not been coined, but Harvard had a graduate program, which was a mix of classical applied mathematics and a little bit of probability theory and statistics and and then some courses on computer hardware and organization of computations, and something called switching theory, which had to do with the design of the logical circuits in a computer. And so all of that was part of my very superficial but broad graduate program. I took control theory, I took circuits courses, I took a course on vacuum tube circuits.
But you're speaking of a graduate program you were taking as an undergraduate?
No, this was,
I'm
jumping ahead to my first graduate year. So to fill in the blanks, I applied for admission to for the degree of, I guess, doctorate in applied mathematics, and with the intention of hanging out at the computation lab, which is what I did.
The question of applied as opposed to theoretical is an important division in mathematics.
Right.
But you knew by way of the experience of the computer?
No, it was the organizational structure of the university.
Okay.
If I wanted to be in the computation lab, then I went to the Division of Engineering and Applied Science.
Okay. So there you were.
And I would have had the latitude to take graduate courses in the math department, but I didn't avail myself of it. I did what I was told. In fact, there's one terrible moment in the middle of my senior year. I knew that I was headed for the computation lab, so I went to see an instructor in the computation lab and for guidance about my program, and he said, looking at my grades, which had some A's but also some B's,
right.
he said, I think you should take a good solid course in accounting.
Which was not a compliment.
Which I don't know whether it was discriminatory or whether he would have said it to anyone or not. But I don't know what was in his mind. But being a submissive fellow, I took it seriously, and it happened to clash with the second semester of complex analysis.
Wow. And you chose accounting?
I chose
over complex analysis?
I chose accounting. I went to see Professor Alfors, an eminent mathematician who had written the textbook for the complex analysis course. Yes. And I asked him for permission to drop the course at mid-year, and he said, "Why?"
Yes, good question.
And I said, because there's an accounting course that I need to take. And he said, you may leave the course.
But somehow you survived this bad decision.
Yeah.
And developed a graduate program, developed in a graduate program.
Right, and again, in the first year, I was an indifferent student. I had a close friend who encouraged me to sort of goof off together, and my grades were mixed. In fact, they were low enough. Well, what also happened was that jumping around a bit, in the second semester of my senior year, I again, following bad advice or no advice, I'm not sure, I started attending a course on alternating current circuits. And I went to the first lecture and I was totally turned off. But I didn't bother to drop the course. I didn't go to any lectures, or very few.
Huh.
I went to the labs because that was rock bottom necessity.
Right.
The night before the final exam, I realized that I didn't have any extra credits and wouldn't graduate with my class if I didn't get a passing grade in this circuits course, which I paid no attention to. So I sat up and read the textbook and went for a long walk by the river contemplating my parents' reaction if I didn't graduate.
Right.
And out of the goodness of his heart, the guy gave me a C-. So I graduated with my class.
So by the skin of your teeth?
Well, no extra credits.
Yeah.
And so I graduated cum laude. I had hoped for a magna,
right.
Which I thought I deserved, but probably, I'm not sure exactly what sealed my fate. I mean, I was, a cum it's sort of like getting a second at Cambridge or something.
Right,
like
exactly.
That. It's not a big distinction.
Right, but somehow you wind up in graduate school. Why are people encouraged by your future with this?
I think the Harvard lab didn't have an excessive number of applicants. It was a new field.
Right.
And
not very high prestige.
Not very high prestige. It was really lucky for me. The timing was perfect. And I was also encouraged to go that way by my mother, who had some prescience about the future, and she said to me, data processing is going to be really big.
Not plastics as a graduate.
Something like that.
Data processing.
Data processing is going to be really big.
Right. Well, because I want to advance in your career, how do you go about choosing the subject of your thesis?
Well, I had a couple of summer jobs, which, unlike the coursework, imbued me with confidence because I did well at both of those. One at MIT Lincoln Lab, and then I had a stint with general electric. Another misstep in my life was to spend the summer in Cincinnati, which I didn't enjoy very much. But I worked for General Electric, and I did okay there, and so I had the feeling that I, had something to offer. And I just hit upon an idea at the beginning of my, I guess it was my third year of. The end of my second year of graduate school. Probably got the idea driving back from Cincinnati after the summer that you could look at a computer program as having associated with it a graph, a directed graph, in which the vertices would be the blocks of the program or the straight line pieces of the program, and the edges would correspond to branch points. And that by viewing it graph theoretically, you could analyze certain properties of programs. For example, you could find out that certain parts of the program were never accessed, or that certain variables were never active at the same time, and so they could share a common storage location and so forth. I could sort of analyzing the structure of computer programs.
And this was not a broad thought elsewhere. This was something you were coming up with.
This was something I was coming up with. I mean, later it became commonplace, but there was no prior literature on this.
And that became the focus of
my thesis. My advisor was a man named Tony Ottinger, who his own work was on machine translation of Russian, and I actually flirted with the idea of working on machine translation. But it really, for one thing, I would have had to learn Russian, and I didn't feel like doing that because throughout all these years I was not a hardworking student.
Right.
And so I went to Tony Ottinger, and I had impressed him earlier because I was a teaching assistant in a course on computational linguistics that he was running, and he had some incorrect ideas about Markov chains, and I showed him examples.
And he welcomed that correction. Yes.
So he saw that I had a little something going for me.
Right.
And Also, I took a course on mathematical methods and operations research from a man named Ken Iverson, who was a very impressive person. His own research was on programming languages, but he taught this course, and it was right up my alley, and I was about 25 points higher than anybody else on the final exam, and so the word got around the lab that I was okay.
Oh, right.
Even though I wasn't okay in any of the hardware courses, and I got some B's in some other courses that I just didn't care about. And
would people have designated you formally as theoretical in regard to computational issues?
Well, I suppose there was no. Well, first of all, there was no computer science. Anyway, so there was certainly no theoretical computer science.
Right.
The number of books was minuscule. There was an orange Princeton book about automata theory, and there was some Martin Davis's book on computability. There was Kleeni's book, which was over my head, but I read a little bit about logic in there. There was virtually nothing.
So how could you guide yourself in what the next step was going to be in a world that was just forming?
Well, I got lucky in my first job after the PhD, which helped, which was crucially important.
Okay.
But as far as the thesis was concerned, I just pursued it on my own, totally on my own. And it wasn't a great thesis. It was original.
Well, that sounds great to me,
but it was hardly deep. I mean, I was never really proud of it. I didn't think it was any great achievement. And later, that field kind of developed, and with it, the more structure developed and new ideas that I hadn't had, and it became a respectable field of within the programming languages and programming systems area.
which you had something to do with.
I had one publication out of the thesis. I don't think it affected the course of history.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to get you to your first job.
Okay, I really got lucky. I walked into the restroom at the Harvard Computation Lab.
It's a good first sentence, okay.
And a southern voice drifted towards me from one of the stalls. It was a man named Fred Brooks, maybe you know the name. And he said, when do you come in to interview at IBM? And so I did, and I interviewed at a number of places, but the IBM situation was by far the best.
Did you have a choice between that and academia, or?
There was no academia.
There was no academia. Okay.
There was no academia. I guess I could have gotten, possibly I could have applied for a job in an electrical engineering department. There were no computer science departments. Well, I think there were a couple just starting. There was one at Purdue, maybe Stanford already had something. MIT had some. MIT was further along than Harvard was, but I didn't think in those terms. I was like everybody else that was coming out that year. In my cadre.
And this was, I know there are a number of golden ages of commercial research, but certainly the IBM Watson laboratory was one of the great places.
It was one of the great places. It was a little bit in the shadow of Bell Labs, which was usually considered number one in industry, but maybe it was number two, and probably it was. And anyway, my interviews there went well. I was offered positions in about 7 different departments at IBM. It came down to a choice between a group that was doing switching theory, which was up my alley. It was combinatorial mathematics.
Right.
Versus Fred Brooks' group designing a computer at Poughkeepsie. And I had enough sense of myself to know that the switching theory was a much better choice.
And you clearly feel that was the right choice.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So you are brought into this team, is it?
Well, I was brought into a team. I had the head of the team was a man named Paul Roth, who was an algebraic topologist and had done interesting work in switching theory. And there were a few other colleagues. There were probably 5 members of the team. And I was by then I had become a little bit brash sometimes. I remember in my summer job back at Lincoln Labs, I somehow went to lunch every day with a group of kind of reserved physicists, and I became the life of the party. I took on the role of the joker. And I think I was beginning to feel, maybe because I got good offers and so on, I was beginning to feel maybe a bit arrogant. And I felt that some of my colleagues, oh gosh, I don't want this to be public, but...
Well, I mean, you're still a young man, you're allowed arrogance.
Yeah, I was single and they were raising families, even though I wasn't killing myself exactly, I was pretty dedicated to my work, and I felt that I was easily holding my own in that company.
How are you choosing your problems, or were they chosen for you to solve?
Partly I was working under the influence of Paul Roth, and I had an assignment to work on the next generation of switching theory software.
Okay.
And I kind of bungled that, actually. He put me in charge of the programming group to actually do the coding for the algorithms. And I worked on the algorithms and did some good stuff there, but I was very lax with the programmers, and I didn't really run it as a shop with goals and deadlines, and I just sort of let it drift. But somehow Paul Roth tolerated this, and I had some independent projects as well.
I want to get you to your first breakthrough.
My first breakthrough. Okay, so in sometime around 1960, I started there in 59.
Okay.
Sometime around 1960, I wrote a little note on a combinatorial problem, a scheduling problem that involved sort of relaxing the problem so to omit some of the constraints to solve a simpler problem, but then fiddling with the certain variables to, it's a technique that I later learned had a name. It's called Lagrangian relaxation.
Fantastic.
And but I kind of reinvented it in a primitive form. So I wrote this little note on a scheduling problem, and I didn't think much of it. And a fellow named Mike Held, who was working in New York City, I was up in Westchester County. Mike Held noticed it, and we got together. I went to his office in New York City, and we realized that we could apply the same technique to the traveling salesman problem.
Okay, which you need to explain, it's such a classic.
Okay, so the traveling salesman problem is perhaps the most well-known combinatorial optimization problem. And it's the problem of a salesman who wants to visit all the cities in his territory at minimum total travel cost. where the distances or costs between the cities are known, are given. So you're given this matrix of distance from New York to Boston is 214 miles and so on. And you try to sift through all of the possible permutations of the cities to find the one that has the minimum travel cost.
Right, okay, I understand.
So, we had some ideas about the traveling salesman problem. And the first idea was really not particularly important, but it led to a publication which is still cited because it gives the best known worst case complexity for the traveling salesman problem. Right. So one of the issues in the theory of computation is how you judge an algorithm, and the standard way for theoreticians is to look at the worst case, that even if an adversary could pick the cities and the distances to confound the algorithm, how long would it take? So we gave a bound. It turned out that independently that was done by somebody else, but we published that and it still stands as the bound. And we tried to base an algorithm on that, but that didn't work well. And then we got the idea of applying this Lagrangian relaxation. So the idea is basically that while finding the shortest tour through a set of cities is the challenging traveling salesman problem, finding the shortest tree connecting all of the cities in a tree-like structure is easy. So we got the idea of a sort of hybrid algorithm where the inner loop would be computing the best tree, and then in between iterations we would fiddle with the costs in a certain way to make it converge towards a cycle, which is like a tree, but with everybody having only two neighbors. So the requirement that you only had two neighbors was handled by fiddling these auxiliary variables, and that turned out to be a pretty good way to attack the problem, and we developed software for it. And
what was this approach called?
Well, it was it's now called the held Karp relaxation. And generically it's Lagrangian relaxation.
Okay.
And there are still people writing theoretical papers about the performance of the held Karp algorithm.
Yes.
So
this was a breakthrough.
Well, yes, I guess you could say so. I mean, I remember that my boss and one of my idols at the time was Alan Hoffman, a very strong mathematician, but much more theoretically inclined. So I don't think he would have said it was a breakthrough, because there weren't many theorems. There was one theorem in the paper, and what made it stand out was that it worked better than other approaches. So for a purist, maybe it wasn't a breakthrough. But I think you could say that it was a breakthrough because it's still cited and referred to. Yeah.
Computation itself still doesn't have a very high reputation as a field of inquiry at this point. Is it considered sort of a lower or applied form of mathematics? Is that good?
I was in an environment by that time where it was definitely not a second-class citizen within the IBM research lab, within the IBM mathematics. But that was my world. I mean, my world was IBM pretty much at that time. So I didn't feel there was a kind of hierarchy within what we would now call theoretical computer science, that computational complexity theory was beginning to emerge, and automata theory, which was a sort of forerunner of computational complexity theory. And that had rich mathematical structure, and difficult problems, and I think that probably would have been considered the sort of caviar, so to speak. And
was that your world?
Well, that wasn't my world.
It was not your world.
Not then.
I know it became something.
Not at that time. But I was abreast of it, and I was reading the literature, and there were some very strong young scientists who were doing it, and most of all Michael Rabin, who's a legendary figure in this field, and he became a close friend, as I can describe also, and a little later in the mid-60s. So in the early days at IBM, I certainly felt that I was in the right place, and the kind of thing I did was supported, and my initial manager, Paul Roth, supported me in the switching theory work.
When did you hear the siren call of academia?
I began getting interested in the mid-60s. What happened was I started looking around a bit in 19. Well, it was kind of a complicated situation. I sort of fell somewhat unwillingly into an engagement to a young woman in 1963, and I guess partly I was looking for a way out.
Mm-hmm. Human factors always play in this. Okay.
And one way out was to look for an academic job, which was sort of, I was beginning to be attracted to that idea anyway.
And was academia beginning to be attracted to you?
And academia was, the opportunities started cropping up. Yeah, so the first one that I looked into, let me recall the chronology. I think the first one that I looked into was at the University of Chicago. And they had a small computer science department, and they offered me a job. But it didn't look as if there was anything very interesting going on. And I didn't like the idea of living in Chicago with the cold winters.
Right.
And so I declined that job. And then, more or less simultaneously, I was offered, that was an associate professorship, I think with tenure, I'm not sure. I was offered an associate professorship at Berkeley, and also a friend at the University of Michigan invited me to come for a year. And I visited Berkeley and I loved it, but stupidly, instead of taking the Berkeley offer, which would have meant burning my bridges with IBM,
right.
I thought, well, Berkeley, Michigan, they're both big state universities. Right. They're pretty much in an equivalence class. So, why not go for a year to Michigan? And that's what I did.
Why did you say stupidly?
Because it was
a good way to calculate.
Well, because Michigan is not Berkeley, I'm sorry.
Oh, you mean for the pleasure of living in one versus the other?
Living in one, and Berkeley was more advanced in my field also.
Oh, it was more advanced.
And anyway, Ann Arbor and I did not hit it off.
Okay.
I blew up to about 220 pounds that year, had minimal social life.
Right, right.
But what I did do that year was I discovered that I was a good teacher.
Okay, that's very important. And how did you were assigned a class?
Yeah, well, right, so I had a full teaching load, but in particular there was this one class in automata theory, and lacking a social life, I threw myself into it, and I must say my lectures were perfect.
Yes. What would represent a perfect lecture? You mean in their clarity?
In clarity, yeah. That I came into every class totally prepared. I wrote notes for the class, and I realized that I had a knack for teaching. I had actually done some casual teaching while working at IBM. I taught courses at, I think back as early as 61, I taught at NYU and later at Columbia and Brooklyn Polytechnic. So I had all along through my time at IBM, but it was the year at Michigan when I taught that class, I realized that I really was very good at teaching.
I think you're the one to ask, what is the relationship between teaching and your own theoretical research work? Are they reinforcing each other? Are they distinct parts of your brain? How does teaching and theory work?
Oh, definitely reinforcing. Very much so. You can't teach a course without really penetrating deeply. And I think it sort of arms me for some of my future work. And I've always, and you know, over the years, it's always been an important connection.
What is that future work? Let's get you into your next truly productive phase.
Okay, so having missed the chance to come to Berkeley in '64, I got another chance in '68, and this time I accepted. Okay. So I came to Berkeley as a full professor in a fledgling department that had been formed. Berkeley had two departments. The well-established electrical engineering department, which had a branch for computer science.
Okay.
And this new department with about 7 faculty members that allegedly was supposed to go off in a different direction closer to the humanities and social sciences. Right. But that connection actually never developed. And so I joined this little department, which featured 3 future Turing Award winners. We didn't know that at the time. And it was really a very good group, but it became clear that the university did not need 2 similar computer science departments.
I see.
And so there was a forced marriage in 1972 or 73, I guess. Being the only tenured faculty member who was not involved in ferocious politics, they made me head of the computer science division of the new merged department. But that's jumping ahead a little bit because getting back to my research,
right.
The big breakthrough of my life occurred in '71 and '72.
Let's talk about that.
So in 1971, I read a paper by Stephen Cook, who had been a colleague at Berkeley but had moved to the University of Toronto. And he showed that a certain problem called the satisfiability problem of propositional logic was as hard as any problem in a certain class. So I have to describe what that problem is and what it means to be hard. So the satisfiability problem is essentially a system, solving a system of equations in Boolean variables. So a Boolean variable is a variable that represents the truth of a statement. So it can assume only 2 values, true or false. Oh, okay. So it's a kind of a 2-valued logic.
Right.
And the satisfiability problem essentially in that problem, you're given a bunch of statements that either X is true or Y is true or Z is false, and other statement, a whole bunch of those statements. And then the question is whether there exists an assignment of truth values to those Boolean variables which satisfy all those equations.
Right.
So, and what Cook showed is that that problem has such generality that you can succinctly express a huge class of other problems. And these other problems are essentially problems where you're given a bunch of constraints, where a solution to the constraints is easy to verify, but may be very hard to solve.
Huh.
So if you go back to the satisfiability problem, it's very hard to sift through the exponential number of truth assignments to these variables. You may have many variables. But if somebody gives you the correct truth assignments, you can easily look at the equations and check that they're satisfied. So problems with this character, that a solution may be hard to find but is easy to verify, that goes by the name NP. And P is the collection of problems where a solution is easy to find.
Right.
And intuitively, verifying is a lot easier than finding a solution.
Right, right.
But the biggest open question in theoretical computer science is whether P is equal to NP. You may have heard of this problem.
What is your contribution? I see Cook setting this enticing issue.
Right.
You jump into it?
So I jumped into it by realizing that the satisfiability problem is not unique in its generality. And I had experience with many other combinatorial problems having the same character, hard to solve but easy to verify.
Right.
And so I just systematically began using a certain technique of reducing one problem to another. I began to show that there was a whole circle of problems that shared with the satisfiability problem the property that a solution is hard to find but easy to verify.
So you send this into the world,
yeah,
this way of thinking.
Right.
And how does the world respond?
With immediate enthusiasm. So it was clear from the beginning that so these problems, which are the sort of hardest ones, are called NP-complete. And so I wrote a paper giving a list of 21 NP-complete problems. And
are they still being worked on?
Yes, but they were in vogue more for a number of years in the 70s, where people would prove that even seemingly very special problems were NP-complete, and there were thousands of such discoveries, and it reached the point where a new NP-completeness result was no longer publishable unless there was some really interesting twist to it. That it became relatively routine to, so you might say that I opened Pandora's box, and then it was sort of easy to carry out further reductions of the kind that I had used, and so many papers were written in the 70s, and there was a book with catalogs and so on. But it reached a point where you couldn't just publish a new NP-completeness result. You could submit it to the catalog.
Let's situate you now.
Okay.
As you talk to the young, as they begin to explore what needs to be looked at.
Right.
Where might your thinking, or maybe where is your thinking now, in terms of what needs to be looked at in theoretical?
I've become the director of an institute dedicated to theoretical computer science. And if I may, I'll give a little of the background for that before, if time allows.
Yes, yes it does.
I had been involved through the 80s and mid-90s, or even beyond, in various politicking for the theoretical computer science community. We had a committee to raise funds, and we actually were instrumental in the creation of a congressionally mandated program that brought a lot of money not only to the theory area but to related areas. And in 2009, I was invited to go to the Simons Foundation for a meeting that included mathematicians, a couple of computer scientists, statisticians, to sort of figure out what Jim, you know all about Jim, I'm sure, for the sake of our audience. He's a stupendously successful hedge fund manager after a brilliant early career in mathematics. And he and his wife founded a foundation and had, among other things, supported mathematics. And in 2009, they were looking for new things to sponsor in the mathematical world. And there were two other computer science representatives in this meeting, Avi Vigderson from the Institute for Advanced Study and Margaret Wright from NYU. And together we proposed the creation of an institute for theoretical computer science. And there was then a competition. So from 2009 onward, I've been totally involved in first in the competition, and then my success was punished by the creation of the institute,
right. The development
which led me to take on an administrative post. So,
but for your sins, you continued to think about this field as well.
Well, right. So basically, what I'm experiencing here at the Institute is that every semester we run 2 programs in selected focal areas, and we bring 50 or more people together to spend a semester working on those programs. And they range over a wide variety of topics. One of the directions that the Berkeley group, including myself, but all of us, have pursued even prior to the formation of this institute, actually starting in the early part of the century, was a notion that we call the computational lens. And this is the idea that computational phenomena occur not only in computer design and programming, but in the natural sciences, the economic sciences, engineering, that you can think of the immune system as a computer figuring out how to fight off invaders. You can, You can think of a marketplace created via the internet as a complex game of conflict between parties who are both competing and collaborating. You can think of certain physical systems as performing computation, and so this lens on the sciences was sort of a theme for the whole group at Berkeley, starting in the early period of the century, and then we adopted that theme as our signature theme for the Institute, and there was this vision which was broader than most of the competitors' visions, because we were reaching out to many scientific fields that I think helped us to win the Institute.
So your vision of the future is the overlap, that's probably not even the right word, but the natural connections between what you have learned in theoretical computation and the need to apply some of those insights into other fields, maybe even particularly biological.
But, well, yes. So that's one of the major themes of the Institute, but we also sponsor programs in core theoretical computer science and in related areas of mathematics. And now, of course, data science has come along as the new cry, so to speak. Data science, AI,
which is where your mother sent you a long time ago.
Yeah, well, I guess you could say that.